Hello there, John Cuturillo here, the counsellor of your listener. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Thank you again to everyone who makes this work possible. And today it's my pleasure to introduce Eleonora Formato from Radio Adelaide. Eleonora, thank you so much for joining us today. Tell us about your show and what you do.
Thank you, John. It's lovely to be here today with you. I produce and present the show Interview on Radio Adelaide, and we go live to air at 4:30 Australian Central Standard Time. It's a casual sort of platform. It's an opportunity for us to share our experiences and learn together, and we go live. So we don't know what's going to happen until we all do together.
Fantastic. Well, that's the type of conversation that I enjoy. I enjoy spontaneity and I enjoy learning with other people. You prompted me to think about a topic that I've been wanting to discuss for quite some time, which is that of how we respond to people with perspectives and opinions that are distinctly different from our own. And I've talked about the psychology of this as a part of other discussions, but it certainly warrants its own discussion because of the prominence that it plays in our life. So please let me just remind our audience that what you find in the media is not advice. If you have concerns about yourself or anyone else, or if anything that you hear today raises concerns, please seek professional guidance. One of the most fundamental issues that we face today and have faced throughout human history is how we treat people when they differ from us, how we respond to them. From an evolutionary perspective, feelings are our mind's way of alerting us to things that happen in the world so that we can focus on them. Opinions are our way of making quick decisions about what to do and how to respond to events that happen in the world. Our minds are constantly active, constantly seeking to make decisions and constantly looking for the truth, so to speak. If somebody differs significantly from us, it gives rise to the possibility that if they are different, then they are perhaps a threat to us. And so from an evolutionary standpoint, it explains why sometimes we can be rather reactive to other people's opinions when they're not the same as ours. Is it really a new phenomenon? Some people say, well, in my day, you could tell any joke you wanted or you could express any opinion you wanted and people just wouldn't care. But I'm hesitant to conclude that because I don't believe that that human psychology has really evolved that much in history. What have been your experiences in talking to people with different perspectives? Do you find that people tend to respond well to each other and can disagree respectfully?
I think for the most part, people are respectful. However, what comes with that then is a certain amount of holding back. So there's no guarantee that that's the real or truthful response to the situation. So, there's that mask or that veil, and it's not certain how far that extends. My personal experience with my guests are that they are quite truthful and open.
So perhaps the fact that your show quite openly promotes the expression of different opinions in a respectful manner, it does attract people who are willing to be both honest about themselves and respectful of other people who may be different. But outside of that, perhaps, as you say, we do engage in impression management. So we do often recognise that people may not respond quite as well as we'd like them to if we express a differing opinion. So sometimes we manipulate how people might respond to give people a reason to respond better than if we were to be more honest about how we believed or felt.
Well, I guess it comes down to, is the feeling the issue or is it the perspective the issue? Because I guess one's a more objective approach and one's a more visceral, personal approach.
Perhaps feelings are indeed visceral and they do involve perhaps sometimes whole body experiences, physical sensations, and thinking is a different process than feeling. It's very easy to and quite common to mistake thinking for feeling when we're in the heat of the moment. It's quite common for us to believe that something is the truth when in reality it is shrouded by layers and layers of feelings based on a number of different factors, including our own past experiences. And if we were to analyse them and deconstruct them, we would find that the actual truth is under that quite distorted when we add so much feeling to it, which is not to say that feelings are not important. They're important for all of us, but when making important decisions such as how to treat each other, just acting on feeling alone can sometimes lead us astray.
And I think it's a good distinction to make. There needs to be space for both and being able to acknowledge these are my feelings and these feelings are valid, and being able to hold separately the objective argument and being able to sit back and go, okay, now let's look at this objectively without the feelings and let's have a look at it and how we got here. What biases are in place? What cultural influences are there? What groupthink is affecting this? Is fear part of this? Is there fear involved in this? I'm going to be treated differently if I see things a certain way. So all those things definitely colour the objective aspect, and at the same time, the feelings are real, and that they are not to be, as you were saying, like dismissed as, and they don't matter. That's surely something that have slightly evolved in that we now acknowledge those things, and that's not something we need to bury.
Sometimes there is quite a valid reason to react to somebody's opinion in a certain way. If someone said that they believe it was completely okay to find a little old granny walking down the street, kill her and steal her handbag, then I can understand why people might not want to associate with that person, because that is quite frankly a horrendous belief and we shouldn't be afraid to label it as such. But much more of what exists in the realm of belief is far more nuanced, because the world is a complex place. There's a difference between importance and validity, and something that's often hard to distinguish is those two concepts. Validity means something represents what it claims to, whereas importance simply means that something should not be ignored and should be addressed or dealt with in some way. I would say that all feelings are important, because from a psychological standpoint, they give us messages, and we need to be attuned to what messages they're sending us. And regardless of what the appropriate response is, we need to be attuned to them. Otherwise, we could miss something important, or we could miss an opportunity to make appropriate decisions ourselves. When it comes to validity, though, I would argue that perhaps feelings don't hold inherent validity. They can be in response to valid concerns, if that's not too much of a conceptualization. But to say that feelings are always valid is perhaps something of an also questionable argument, simply from the standpoint that sometimes our feelings can fool us. And sometimes we can feel something without it actually being reflective of what's on the outside world. So it's not to negate the importance of the feelings, but to state that we, in order to have the healthiest minds possible, have to be able to distinguish between when the feelings are reflective of something valid and when they may be exaggerated or distorted in some way. So, for example, if someone is attacking you, then you should feel fear. That is a valid feeling, because it's your body's way of saying you need to do something, or else that person is going to hurt you. Or it's also your mind's way of telling you that someone is doing something they shouldn't.
Would examples of something like that be post-traumatic stress disorder or trauma-informed approaches?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the main examples that I've used in the past is I suffer from borderline personality disorder. I was diagnosed some time ago. I don't have as many symptoms now, and even the ones that I do have, I'm able to control. And so I'm very grateful that I've reached the point in my life where now it doesn't greatly affect me to any extent, and any effects that I do have, I can manage them. But one of the key symptoms of borderline personality disorder is emotional reactivity to events that are relatively innocuous. And one of the things that can happen when somebody with this particular condition might be interacting with someone else is they may misinterpret, and I know I have plenty of times in my past, misinterpret something that someone else says as a threat to them or as offensive, when in reality it was relatively neutral. In those instances, the feelings themselves are important, because the importance is that we need to attend to them and do something with them and make sure we're taking care of ourselves. But when it starts to become problematic is when we then react to them and treat the other person as if they were truly threatening us, when in reality that's not what they were doing at all, and they were just making a point that was neutral. But that's a good example, a good mention on your part, because that's a good way to exemplify that concept.
And I think it's very brave of you to mention what you did, because I'm sure a lot of people would feel quite uncomfortable hearing that as an example of feeling uncomfortable and feeling that they would need to distance themselves. Whereas I would argue that people need people in their lives to learn who they are and how to interact with people. And if you don't have that interaction with people, that's only going to exacerbate any issues. So
part of the power of open discussion, like you facilitate on your program, like I facilitate on mine, is what I would call quite concisely destigmatization of certain issues. If we destigmatize, the narrative that we're creating is, regardless of how uncomfortable it may be, we can support each other. And regardless of how controversial or however much I disagree with your opinions or you disagree with mine, we can support each other and recognize that we're both humans, and that if we are to find the truth, it involves both of us being equally curious and to equally closely examine the issue.
It's that understanding of wanting to understand the situation, I guess taking responsibility for realizing that if you interact with a certain way with a certain person, that it is likely to possibly trigger them or affect them in a certain way, and find ways to manage that in a different healthy way. So not that you can't be yourself or you always have to be on guard, but just to be mindful of that, because regardless of whether there's a condition or not, everybody has certain things that they are going to respond to better than other things.
Supporting someone doesn't mean having to necessarily just say yes to everything. Part of caring about someone can also mean telling them when you think there might be a risk to them that they should consider before making their next move. I'm sure most, if not every doctor, would feel quite uncomfortable when they have to tell a patient, look, what we're about to do carries a risk of death. It can't be comfortable, because if it was comfortable, then it would possibly mean that they didn't necessarily recognise the risk themselves. Important issues carry with them a lot of emotional weight. One of the important issues is how we decide that somebody else's opinions are too uncomfortable for us to bear. Now, again, I'm hesitant to say that this is a new issue, because I'm quite certain that throughout human history, the psychology that underlies this has basically remained constant. It's just that we direct it to different subjects. I will say that now with social media, it's much easier for us to communicate. Communication is much more accessible than it used to be. So we can more readily express opinions and disagreement with them. So perhaps the sheer accessibility of communication has meant that we're doing more disagreeing now, simply because there is more opportunity to.
I can't but help and think back to the trials, the Spanish Inquisition, where people were burnt at the stake or drowned, and be like, if you survive, then it was meant to be. If you didn't, then that you're bad. It's like, how did that logic come into place? Or people like Galileo, who were confined to one spot because of discoveries that they made, and people couldn't take it on. It's almost seems like it's the change that is the difficult aspect. But I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I'm not an expert in this area, but I wouldn't be surprised if control was part of it for a few, and that was then exploited.
Sometimes what we try to do is, to put it bluntly, fool ourselves into thinking that we have control over everything. And sometimes that can mean, when we don't have control, denying it, that we don't have control, and trying to fool ourselves into thinking we do. Or alternatively, try to take control of situations where it may not be the best solution. And in this case, those situations that you've described may well fit that description. Those were instances in which people simply felt uncomfortable, and because of the risk of the discomfort, the threat that the discomfort posed to them, they thought, I'm going to combat this by taking control. The best way to take control is to simply rubbish the other person and suppress them so that they can't cause this threat to me.
Well, it would change their whole life. It was a threat to the way they lived, their livelihood, their literal comfort of their income and the lifestyle that they were accustomed to. So sometimes I guess things can be almost on a basic level, not necessarily something. Although who's to say? Don't know. I guess that's the theory of mind. That's a difficulty. How do we really know what's going on in the minds of other people? What is the mind? And on the flip side, then there's also like such an Australian term, but the tall poppy syndrome, where people feel uncomfortable on the other end and they want to cut things down so that someone's not getting too far ahead with what they know, or too good at what they do. Even though when it comes to athletes in the Olympics, yes, of course we want to have the best athletes, and we want them to be world class and break the records and win the golds at the Olympics. So it almost seems like there are exceptions to these rules.
That's the psychology essentially of politics or ideology, that we only apply the logic of our ideology when it suits us often. But then we ignore that same logic when ignoring that same logic brings us the benefits that we wish. The mind does need structure to guide it, and both within ourselves and within society, if we don't have norms or we don't have a set of structures to organise how we understand the world, then our minds tend to essentially get lost, and it can lead to both disorganization within our own minds and then disorganization amongst society. And with that, we become less constructive and we essentially do less to better ourselves and to better the world around us because our mind essentially doesn't have a path. But the problem is that if you take structures, and which essentially laws are, they're structures, as absolutes, without considering that there is no such ease in life, life is complex and we have to be constantly adapting to different demands, then the application of those structures may eventually cause harm to people.
It's one thing to be in situations where everything's going correctly and everybody's on the same page and no one's rocking the boat. It's so much easier to do sort of the right thing based on whatever that group is doing. And it's so much harder to continue to do that when something goes wrong. It's under pressure. That's when the real difficulties arise. And I realize as I'm saying that aloud, I can hear it. That's not to say everybody should be only around certain types of people to the exclusion of the others, because it actually can be in that silo or that vacuum where the inconsistencies can arise and not be seen because there's no accountability, there's no transparency. So it can actually possibly be the opposite. It's only to say that, you know, if you isolate yourself and you ponder on these things, it's a lot easier to not do anything wrong. And then when you start interacting with another human being, then that's when it's like, oh no, I just said this, or oh no, why did I go about that way? I just made a mistake. And
if you follow rigid rules and everyone follows them in exactly the same way, then yes, there is less chance of a mistake, so to speak, but those mistakes are relative to the context. If everyone follows the same rules, then everyone will perceive each other as not making mistakes, but that's because they are obeying the rules, and the logic that they're using is that the rules are correct. Therefore, if you obey the rules, you will not be incorrect. By extension, you cannot make mistakes that way. That's one of the problems with perception. It's not objective. Just because you believe something or just because you set rules, it does not mean that they reflect reality outside of consciousness. So you can perceive something as correct, but whether it's actually good for you or good for those around you is a completely different matter. In almost every case, life is more complex than what rules can encompass. And this is why I often talk about why it's not wise to think that you're smarter than Mother Nature, because Mother Nature creates reality. We have reality there. We can do our best to try to understand it, but your mind can never analyze exactly what all the consequences are going to be. Your mind cannot analyze on its own what the consequences are at a given time to other people, to yourself. The only way to fully understand that complexity of reality is to absorb different information and then examine it against the consequences and examine it against the real world.
what if being uncomfortable is the fact that everybody is thinking the same and you're now questioning whether that's the correct thing to do? Like, it might be the right thing to do in terms of following what is there. And so thinking the same way can actually be uncomfortable.
It is possible for someone to be repulsed by someone else's beliefs, not because they necessarily truly disagree with them, but because those beliefs make them realize, hey, maybe I've been exposed to so many destructive ideas that now I have to really question myself and ask, was what I believe true? It's not comfortable to look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, I may have been wrong, but it's a necessary part of life. And if you really genuinely want to live your best life, we all have to, at some stage, ask ourselves, could I have done better? Or did I do something wrong? Or have I made a mistake?
I guess that's where to be able to sit comfortably with different ideas and opinions and not necessarily take them on as one's own can facilitate that. I'm wondering how much of the problem is that there's this sense of association, as if if you're talking to someone who's talking a certain way, that must mean that you embody what they're saying as well. And of course, it's not possible. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't see that it would be feasible or possible to absolutely take on everybody's opinions and beliefs that you speak with and believe them and take them as your own. Like, that just seems statistically not possible.
I do sometimes wonder whether one of the reasons why people are so repulsed by opinions that are radically different from their own is because they have an unconscious fear that if they associate with people who disagree with them for long enough, they may start to believe something that they don't want to. being exposed to an idea can lead you to believe it over time, but it's not a direct causal relationship. Just being exposed to something in itself doesn't cause you to believe it or act on it alone. There have to be mental context. Your mind has to have perhaps absorbed some information that already suggests that you were heading in that direction, or perhaps you've had experiences that then interact with what you're hearing that lead you to believe maybe this is correct. Perhaps you hear something and then have experiences that make you reflect on it and make you think that perhaps it's correct. Perhaps you're impressionable, but then the impressionability in and of itself is another factor that interacts. You also have to choose to believe it. This is why I get rather concerned about people saying so-and-so should not be allowed to express their opinion in public because people could hear it and then act on it. If you hear something on the news that makes you want to be violent, the violence is still your choice, right? Just because someone says that you should be violent doesn't mean you have to be. And regardless of how strongly you believe in it, you have a duty to know the law says you do not be violent.
Is that the actual psychology?
It is possible for what we observe to then influence how we behave, but children are a lot more impressionable because their minds have not yet developed to the extent that they can make a lot of their own decisions. They're relying on adults to teach them the right ideas. But we're adults. We can be responsible for our decisions. So, you may hear a particular politician speaking on the news saying we must, eliminate this group or that group because they're our enemy. You can believe it all you want, but in the end, it is your responsibility to still step back and say, hang on a minute, if someone wants me to commit violence, do they really have my or anyone else's best interest in mind? Probably not.
It's like quite a personal view in a way. I'm giving myself away here to any listeners listening in who listen to my show, because I tried to be very neutral, because the idea is that from week to week, the person who sits there, in theory, should feel as comfortable as the person the week before, regardless of their position or view. It's supposed to be a safe space. Although this is a bias, I guess you could say. I would have thought it's better to bring up certain thinking to the light of day, to know that certain thinking or ideas are out there, to be like, I had no idea that was out there, because then if you know, then you can think about it and try to understand it and try to make sense of it and see if there's a solution to that situation. I mean, it may not be, but I mean, it's that difficulty of the chicken or the egg. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the little dogs can really be having a big go out like a big dog, and then the big dog snaps at the little dog, and you just don't know to what extent. Again, we're humans, we're not dogs, and there's taking responsibility. And at the same time, like, what got things to that point that provoked? At the same time, there is such a thing as provoking. I guess we're really wondering aloud here. We're really thinking. That's the other thing, is we're trying to make sense of the world in this conversation. So this is not like absolute. And sometimes I get the impression that people think, oh, that must be what you think in that moment. And it's like, well, hang on, we should be able to work things and try to make sense of things aloud. It's a way of trying to figure things out, as opposed to this is an absolute position, and people being uncomfortable about talking to someone with an idea because they are concerned that other people will perceive them to believe or accept that what is being said is true, for that to mean that is their belief, like, or that they are accepting that belief. And that isn't necessarily the case. It is possible to listen for the sake of curiosity, to try to understand.
You're absolutely right that sometimes what people do is they engage what's known as an inoculation effect, which essentially means that if they know that somebody is going to try to influence their opinion, or at least they believe someone is, they prepare themselves mentally by essentially, at least temporarily, believing an extreme version of what the opposite opinion is, because they want to ensure that person does not change me. And you're right that guilt by association is also a real phenomenon, and people very readily judge someone based on the people with whom they associate, which can be, again, a double-edged sword. It sometimes is true that if you associate with someone, then you have to know what they stand for, and you would have to at least believe in it to a certain extent, but that's often not the case.
I mean, it's possible to love and care for someone and see the dignity in a person in life and not have to agree.
There's a particularly important reason why people might want to avoid people who disagree with them. And often the argument is, which in and of itself is not necessarily always false, but it's not always true either. This person supports a regime that puts people at risk or that could harm people and that could harm me. Therefore, if I continue to interact with them or associate with them, then I am enabling them to continue holding those beliefs. This is not an easy subject. This is a very complicated matter. Often how people perceive threat can be slightly distorted, and what people perceive as a regime that harms people isn't necessarily directly harmful. It can be associated with harm, but the association is complicated by other factors. It's not a direct cause.
Right? And conversely, if that influence is so strong in one direction, then by interacting with them, then there'd be an opportunity to influence them.
Absolutely. And I have known of people to become acquainted with others who have some rather dangerous views, and I mean objectively quite dangerous views. And these people have been very much disapproving of those other people's views, but have stood by them because over time they want to show them, if you continue believing these views, you could end up in danger and you could also hurt other people. You're worth more than that. Don't fall subject to this indoctrination because you are smarter than that and you are worth saving, essentially. Not to make it an issue of a saviour complex, but perhaps in a spiritual sense, you are worth saving from these evil beliefs. And it's not to say that people should feel an obligation to stand by other people when they could be dangerous. In the end, you have to take care of your own safety. But at the same time, sometimes people do see that as an opportunity to help other people awaken, which is not to say that they want them to think more like them, but rather that they just help them to see that certain beliefs are just dysfunctional and that they can hurt yourself and that they can hurt other people. But a lot of people would make the argument right now that, you two are just privileged, you're not really affected by these different opinions, and however you vote, the country's still going to be the same. You're still going to be privileged. If you were someone who was genuinely underprivileged, then you would be a lot more selective about with whom you associated. Personally, I say I consider myself lucky, and I'm grateful for that. But at the same time, all of us are fallible in some way, and it's not necessarily the case that just by being willing to be respectful to one another that we are demonstrating privilege, because anyone is capable of that. And I think, again, there would be people with whom, if you or I came into contact with them, if we were in danger or if they were someone who was genuinely a dangerous person, we would probably not want to be around them because we recognise the danger and we wouldn't want to enable danger. We wouldn't want to enable someone else's dangerous behaviours. But at the same time, what we're recognising here is that a lot of what people call a belief that's too bad for me to consider is a lot less extreme than what we think it is. We just think it's extreme because we react to it and our mind tells us that. But if we kind of examine it more, we would start to see that there are nuances to it and perhaps it's not black and white. Let's perhaps explore some examples that we've seen. A good example that comes to mind was I was having a conversation with someone once and they told me about a friendship that they had that ended with someone else, whereby they found some meme on the internet that was very much derogatory of the working class. And this person took this meme and sent it to someone else and basically said, how stupid is this person for thinking that? Their friend then responded by saying, haha, that's a typical white person comment. What I believe about those kinds of politics isn't really relevant here. I'm just analysing the psychology of how the situation unfolded. The person who originally sent it then went out and said, well, I don't really think it's a white person problem. It's just a matter of them being stupid for saying that. Like, anyone can be stupid. And their friend insisted, well, yeah, but it's mostly white people who say that. And the other person said, well, yeah, but, I've seen people of different cultures say these kinds of stupid things, so I don't think it's down to culture, and I don't think culture causes you to be stupid. Sometimes people say stupid and unkind things, and that's just part of how the human race works. It escalated from there, and the other person was getting rather agitated at this point and saying, this is showing me a level of privilege that I'm really uncomfortable with, and if you really believe that we shouldn't admonish white people, then I really don't want to be friends with you. And the friendship ended that night, just because that person decided, I don't want to be friends with someone who doesn't think white people are bad. I went away thinking there's so much nuance to that kind of issue that it really just isn't healthy for us to think this person disagrees, therefore I'm out. Okay, the healthiest thing for me to do is to just step away. That could have been a perfectly good friendship that was destroyed over one disagreement. And it didn't have to be that way.
On the one hand, the irony of something being put out there and then someone making the judgment that that was stupid. So, I guess that's, and neither of them sort of picked up on that inconsistency, like to say, well, hang on, saying that stupid is in a way doing exactly what that means doing. It's a difficult one because it's an uncomfortableness, because most people who are wanting to do the right thing are going to be scared that they don't want to be racist or seen as being racist, and it becomes uncomfortable. Like, how and when can you step and go, no, this is not being racist, and this or something is being racist, and calling it for what it is without escalating things. And it's almost as if through not trying to escalate things escalated.
You're absolutely right that by trying to be reasonable and say, well, I'm trying to find common ground with you, by recognizing that what this person said was really inconsiderate, they inadvertently may have escalated it, and then the other person also reacted to it, and it bounced off each other until eventually it just collapsed. I've seen this happen a lot, and I've been trying to encourage people to reflect on something. Just because you perceive something, it doesn't mean it's true. And if you avoid something just because you perceive it a certain way, what you're doing is you're saying to yourself, just because I feel uncomfortable with something, the best way to deal with it is for me to avoid it. That's called avoidance coping. The problem with that is that if you develop that as a narrative throughout your life, it actually weakens your resilience, because unfortunately you can't control what happens in the world. So eventually what's going to happen is you're going to face something that you can't avoid. And where are all your coping skills going to be? They're going to be disappeared because you've essentially got yourself used to being avoidant. And often that's going to hurt no one but you. It's quite dangerous.
Surely there's also a limit, though. I mean, if there's a wound and you keep having got that wound, it's just going to aggravate it. And there are times when it's better to be able to go, hey, you know what, I need a bit of respite, and I need to not feel uncomfortable and feel comfortable so that I can heal and recuperate and feel refreshed and think my best and be in a positive frame of mind so that I can approach what's coming up next with resilience.
You're right, and I don't know what this other person's background was. Maybe they had some of those experiences. Especially if you're affected by mental illness, this is where it becomes really difficult, because to be fair, a lot of the people who engage in these behaviours are not necessarily affected by mental illness. Doesn't mean their feelings are unimportant, going back to one of the first concepts we discussed in this discussion. But when you have a mental illness, it can affect your ability to process information in a way that's healthy. And that's, again, it's part of being unwell. It's not your fault. Healthy coping means being able to recognise that sometimes you do need to step away and let yourself heal so that you can engage. But then you also don't want to make a habit of just not re-engaging, because then eventually what can happen again over time is you set yourself a habit of just avoiding whatever makes you uncomfortable. And then when you can't avoid something, you may find yourself in bad consequences. And some of the bigger consequences I'm seeing now, we're isolating ourselves from each other because we're either scared to offend each other, or we just can't stand that someone else has different beliefs. We're becoming so divided. If someone you admire, like a particular politician or someone in the media or the leader of a particular ideological group, if someone says, avoid those people who disagree with you because they're your enemy, and we look at society and we're all divided and polarised, the question that I encourage people to really ask is, do you really think those people with power really have our best interests in mind? If what they are saying to us is resulting in us being divided, do we really think that's in our best interests?
And a lot of things come down to a matter of degree as well. There's a difference between having different views between you need to be independent and pull yourself up from your own bootstraps versus, hey, we need to support each other and be there for each other. Like, maybe you don't have any bootstraps to be able to pull yourself up from. And then there's a difference between getting yourself caught up in the periphery of, say, a cult or gang violence and being able to go, no, it's in your best interest not to associate with, violent criminals. Then that is going to protect people. Absolutely. And we can't support each other if we allow ourselves to be divided. So part of
horses for courses means recognizing boundaries, recognizing that there are certain beliefs that we don't want to adopt personally, but then making a fine judgment about whether we are going to admonish someone for having different beliefs or whether we're going to simply recognize that we don't want to adopt those same beliefs and engage in those behaviors with someone else. Or another extreme entirely, whether we want to completely disassociate ourselves from people who have certain beliefs because those beliefs are harmful. And each of those different approaches has a place, but an all or nothing approach doesn't result in good judgment. Again, if the outcome is that we're being violent and hateful of each other and we're being divided, we're not doing what's best by society or ourselves or each other.
And then I guess the next sort of question on that is where's that line where it becomes political? Often people say, oh, that's become political. How?
I recently produced an episode on the psychology of politics and talking about the irrationalities and inconsistencies of stereotypical progressive and conservative politics. But one of the explanations I gave people was, just because you agree with an idea that happens to be adopted by a particular political group doesn't mean you're a member of that group. Remember that politics, like all belief systems, is constructed. We invented it, nature didn't, which means that just because you say something that is associated with a particular political standpoint, it doesn't mean that you were trying to support it by saying it. Sometimes certain ideas are true and happen to be associated with politics, but the inverse isn't true. Politics is not truthful, but truth can sometimes be associated with politics. Whether there's a difference between saying something true because it benefits you and saying something is true because you know it's true and you want to be honest and sincere.
That's an interesting thing to think about, though. Why or how is it that something would benefit them? Like, what's the point of saying something to a benefit if they don't believe in it and it's not true, or if it is true? Like, where's that distinction between it being true and it benefiting?
Let's give an example. Let's take the issue of the LGBT community, all right? Now, it is absolutely the case to say that whether you are gay, straight, transgender, cisgender, bisexual, whatever your orientation may be, those factors alone cannot cause you to be good or bad at a particular job. Let's say the job's accounting. I haven't seen an accounting firm say this, I'm just hypothesizing here, but an accounting firm may genuinely not care what your orientation is and hire you based on your ability to do your job. Now, their website may have no political slogans on it, but then when they go to interview candidates for a role, they may be genuinely considering what your qualifications and expertise are, and whether you're gay or not, they don't care. But then there may be another organisation who knows that they're likely to get more support from the public and from politicians and from the media by putting an LGBT flag on their website and saying, we support people of all sexual orientations. The organisation that does it just for the sake of support, they're referencing something truthful in the sense that your sexual orientation does not cause you to be good or bad at your job. You can be good or bad at your job independent of your sexual orientation. So you should be judged on your competence. But the reason they're doing it may not be because they genuinely want people to recognise that they can go work for there even if they feel like they've been outcast because of their sexual orientation. They're doing it for attention. It's companies that misuse it and bodies that misuse it that are to blame for virtue signalling, not the individuals themselves. The individuals themselves may not agree with that approach. So that's an example of how sometimes you can say something that has reference to a truthful concept but is not being used for sincere reasons.
It's a good, clear example. I guess it's the idea of why are you doing something? You're doing it for the right reasons. It's because you really, truly believe it's the right thing to do, or you're doing it just because you don't want to get in trouble. Intentions definitely, they do make a difference, and sometimes they don't. Well, we were talking about feeling comfortable and uncomfortable and not shying away from situations that are uncomfortable completely, because that's what helps us grow, and it can actually become detrimental for our resilience. I was bringing up, what about the need sometimes to, punch out from that so you can take a rest? And sometimes kids growing up have adults that say, you need to go through this because this is tough. And yet that's an example of going, hang on, no, sometimes you need to get out of that situation. You need to pull back. That's not a situation to be in. So
absolutely. And again, part of being respectful to one another and courtesy on a individual level is to recognise when you need to treat somebody else with greater care. So if we were recounting a traumatic experience and a client said to me, John, I can't do this right now, then my immediate reaction would be safety procedure. We do a breathing exercise, or we do a mindfulness exercise, or we do something that helps prevent that mental anguish from escalating from recounting that event. But we can't assume that one approach is always appropriate, and treating something as a general default position is probably not a good idea in this case, and saying anything that is remotely uncomfortable is bad. Compare that to approaching a situation and saying if two people are interacting and there is something that is bothering one, then it is the right thing to do for them to, for the other person to respect their wishes.
And I guess the way you're saying that, it highlights the need for being able to evaluate each situation for the situation that it is and the individuals involved, and being able to factor in a whole heap of different techniques and thought processes and critical thinking and understanding of culture and where those people are at that point in life, and whether they are affected by trauma, and that might mean they're reacting in a way that they might not otherwise, or whether they're stuck internally and the problem is within them and they don't even realize it, and it's being acted out as if it's the other person's, or whether it is genuinely a situation that needs to be pulled away from. It's no size fits all, and sometimes it's good to be uncomfortable and sometimes it's not. I guess there are situations where in the process of reflection and working on something that I had a belief about certain things, and what I was doing wasn't necessarily aligning with that, and having to then sit back and go, okay, well, what's stopping me from following through so that the two are congruent, and working through that fear and getting that confidence to be able to go, no, I need to raise this issue, and I realize that this may be uncomfortable for other people, but more so it might be uncomfortable for me because I know that previous reactions haven't been fantastic, which is part of the reasons why I've started to pull back and pull back and pull back. And it's that weighing up of, do I say something and potentially put myself in a situation where I know a lot's going to change for me, or do I not say anything and not rock the boat, sort of like to sail under the radar? And that in itself then made me question a lot of things. It's like, well, I've always espoused, like, to do things, like, what sort of hypocrite am I? So it brings up things from multiple angles, and trying to find that courage to go, it's more important to speak up in this moment, and finding that support on whatever level to be able to do that and go, okay, well, this is what I've been saying, and now it's time for me to say that as well, and accept that and realize that I guess maybe perhaps two values were in conflict, and this is the one that I need to decide to go with and accept the consequences of that, and know that I'm comfortable with that. It might be something like, I remember like in school, it was taught everywhere. If you see something happening and you don't say or do something about it, then you're just as bad as the people that are doing what's being done. And so being in a situation where you can see things are being done, but you know that the moment you speak up, you're going to then be on the receiving end. You're going to join that pool of people that whatever it is you can see being done. And so going, well, I don't want to have to deal myself with that. Like I don't know that I have the strength. Like if that attention gets brought onto me, I don't want that. And then getting to the point where it's like, no, it is more important to say something or to change the situation, because the realization dawned that I've got a greater responsibility to say something about it because of the position that I have within that situation. So withdrawing from that position, so that way to be able to say, well, I don't condone what's happening here. I can no longer be a part of this, and trying to do it in a way that's going to make sense. And at the same time, also realizing that it isn't always possible to act on things straight away and to be kind with oneself, because sometimes there is information, and by acting on it, it could actually cause more problems. And it's not from a selfish for yourself, but for lots of other people. And it actually may be more important to just wait until there's a safe time to go about something. That can be very difficult. That can also be very helpful, because that can take a bit of that pressure off. So rather than be like, why didn't I do this sooner, or how come I didn't do this, able to be, you can look at it objectively a bit and go, okay, again, it's that first aid thing, which is easier said than done. It's easier to see, but it's not necessarily obvious. And so then being able to sit there and go, okay, yep.
When you are deciding to rock the boat, so to speak, in other words, have a conversation with someone who might have some power in the interaction, you never really know how they're going to respond. So there's always a risk involved that they won't take it the wrong way, no matter how reasonable you're being. And so it's a genuine concern that some people have when they need to raise a concern about how a situation's affecting them. It's not always easy to say you should just stand up for yourself when sometimes people do misuse their power and someone might take advantage of or cause harm to them for making a reasonable comment or saying something about their own rights that was quite reasonable. Even though a person rocking the boat, so to speak, might make the other person uncomfortable, it's in good faith that the other person at least listens and considers that what that person is saying might be quite relevant and in their best interest, and maybe a perfectly reasonable request. And it's, if the other person acts in good faith, then they should acknowledge that. And at the same time, we have to also acknowledge that sometimes having a role in a situation does make you culpable for what's happening. I'm not sure the nature of the situation described. For details, obviously, you can keep them confidential, but there are situations in which we may be complicit in bad events because we have chosen to contribute in some way by enabling the people who are directly contributing, or by partaking or by funding, for example, certain entities that are causing harm to others. And there is often a point at which we can say, I do not want to be a part of this. I don't want to be responsible for other people getting hurt. And that's perfectly legitimate. If something you're doing is actually contributing to a bad situation, then absolutely there is a legitimate ethical argument to be made about leaving the situation so as to not contribute. It's just that not all situations are like that. Sometimes other people aren't the enablers that we think they are. Sometimes it's just a case of we're uncomfortable, we don't agree with them, and then our minds try to justify us being avoidant and reactive by saying, well, if you associate with them, then you're enabling them, when in reality that's not necessarily true. It may not necessarily be false, but it's hard to discern that it's true as well. And sometimes it can be just a way of justifying not wanting to be around people who disagree with us.
Well, it's more a case of whether anything's done about it. If you're seeing something being done to someone else and you stay silent about it. So, I mean, if you are in an organizational structure and that person that you can see that something's being done wrong to, and you're on the same level as them, it's different to if you recognize that you're part of a group that is in a position of authority, and that group in authority is doing something that's not necessarily right by that person, then that becomes an inequality, and it may not even be recognized. It may take a bit to dawn on someone that, oh, I didn't put two and two together, that by being in this particular group or committee or management position with a group of people, that means that other people in the organizations actually have less power and authority. And then looking at, I guess, decisions where, I mean, democracy, you don't all vote the same. So after a bit, though, you know, if you don't stand up and go, well, doesn't mean you said, yes, I agree to this, but you didn't actually step up and say, well, no, I don't agree either. So, because that can be really difficult. So it's learning when not to be silent. And that can be really difficult. And there are times, though, where it is necessary to be silent, because in bringing something up that time, it's the wrong time, and it can just make things worse. And sometimes I think it's not always clear what is what until definitions are investigated and understanding what things are and how they're presented, information is presented. And it can be a real eye-opener and not realize it. Yes, there's corruption. However, until it's presented like, well, this is an idea of what corruption is, and it's put in a manner that is absorbable, then it's like, oh, I hadn't seen that. Like I didn't put two and two together that in this particular situation, this could potentially be a conflict of interest, or this could be corruption, until it is looked at under that definition.
It is true, though. We do judge how to deal with present situations by comparing them to mental standards about what's acceptable in similar situations about examples of what we've done in the past, other information, and so forth. That's a perfect analogy for how it works. Well, Eleonora, this has been a fantastic discussion, and as per usual, I really enjoy exchanging these types of ideas about the metaphysics, about the abstracts of how our minds work and how we work with each other and how we perceive each other. So thank you very much for joining me. I've really enjoyed this discussion.
Thank you. I have too. And it's been simultaneously comfortable and uncomfortable. So I think we've achieved the goal there. And it's good to know that there's safe spaces to be able to discuss things and explore things and sort of to test ideas and boundaries, and know that they're not necessarily a makeup of who we actually are, that they don't define us or reflect that, yes, this is our fixed position, that we can look into these things and explore them to better understand each other and ourselves.
Absolutely. And to our audience, thank you for joining us for the journey and listening in. I'd like to remind everyone that regardless of the fact that we may seem quite different, often we are more alike than we are different. And so I'd like to encourage everyone to take every opportunity they can to meet people, discuss different perspectives with them, do it non-judgmentally, do it with curiosity, learn as much as you can, and reflect as much on yourself as you do on other people. Critically question yourself. There's no harm in it. You learn something when you critically question yourself. And at the same time, let's remember that regardless of how different we may seem, if we want a good society, we have to find ways to respect each other and to support each other. And so I encourage everyone to help to contribute to that goal by getting to know people, being non-judgmental, and ultimately contributing to a cause that helps us all to support each other rather than keeping us divided. And I also encourage everyone, if you have any concerns about yourself or someone else, please seek professional advice. Never try to self-assess or take what you find in the media as advice or on the internet. And until next time, everyone, we thank you for joining us. Take care.